Welcome back, everybody, to our ongoing discussion of The Sun Also Rises. Here we go today with Chapter 8. Early on in the chapter, we're presented with Jake's newfound attitude, and it's really sort of, I think, captured by this description here when he says, Brett was gone. I was not bothered by Cohen's troubles. I rather enjoyed not having to play tennis. There was plenty of work to do. I went off into the races, dined with friends, and put in some extra time at the office, getting things ahead so I could leave it in charge of my secretary when Bill Gordon and I should shove off to Spain at the end of June. There is a sense of reinvigoration here from Jake, right? He seems sort of newly energized about his current situation. And I think a lot of that has to do with this burden that has been removed. Brett and all of the emotional trauma and baggage, dare I say, has been removed. And the same thing goes with Cone. With both of them, there's sort of that old cliche out of sight, out of mind, and he's no longer consumed with them. This chapter also introduces us to the sport of boxing in the novel, and I think that's not necessarily a coincidence or just some sort of happenstance. Now, would boxing appeal to the typical Hemingway hero, the code hero, if you will? And does it fit in with the way Hemingway thinks about the world, thinks about his true nature of the universe, and how we're supposed to approach it? I would love to get your feedback on these questions, so take a minute either at the end of the video or you can pause right now and go back into Google Classroom at this post. And in the comments section, let me know what you're thinking about this and answer these questions. I'm sure we all remember from the Hemingway Hero PowerPoint this idea of grace under pressure, and Bill Gordon is a big proponent of it when he says, never be daunted, secret of my success, never been daunted in public. In this particular case, being daunted is just a fancy way of saying being drunk. And it has to do with Bill's appearance in public, right? The facade that he puts up to the world and how he sort of faces the world, and this idea that he doesn't show any weakness. And that all ties in with this idea of grace under pressure. And, as Hemingway would say, we can't control what goes on, but we can control the manner in which we confront what goes on in the world around us. And I think it also ties into masculinity as well. We remember from the biography video, Hemingway would talk at length about his ability, right, to consume alcohol, but to do so, quote unquote, well, meaning he would never show signs of impairment. And I think this is part of that. And he also directly tied that into uh, masculinity and quote unquote being a man. Also, beyond that, beyond the ideas of masculinity, we also see a bit about identity and sort of individuality in this chapter. There's a moment when Bill and Jake are going out to eat, and as they enter the restaurant, Jake tells us it was crowded with Americans and we had to stand up and wait for a place. Someone had put it in the American Women's Club list as a quaint restaurant. The Paris quiet is yet untouched by Americans, so we had to wait 45 minutes for a table. Well, for starters, as we said in the first bullet point here, these are people who are strictly relying on institutions to tell them what is good, to tell them where they should go, where they should eat, the experience they should have, rather than relying on their own experience or rather their own evaluation of their experience. And then, perhaps more importantly, though, is the way it's described, right? It was crowded with Americans. Jake says that as if he and Bill are not Americans when they are, right? They are part of that group, but they don't necessarily see themselves that way. They don't see themselves as being a part of that particular group. And it all ties into this lost generation sort of mentality. They're outsiders. They don't see the point necessarily of the purpose or value as being part of that identity. And then, of course, there is a little bit of humor here in the irony, right? And that this place is famous for not being crowded, and so of course, because it's famous, now it's crowded. Towards the latter stages of the chapter, we're introduced to another new character, Mike Campbell, and if that name sounds familiar, it should. That's Brett's fiance. And I find it interesting of note that when the subject of Brett comes up, Mike continually uses the same word over and over and over when he describes her, and that's as this peace. And it's basically this, I think, sort of not so subtle nod as to how he sort of views the whole thing. She's more of an object. The relationship is more of a transaction, right? He gets this object as a result of uh, his possible love for her, affection, etc., etc. Um, and then, of course, it's really no surprise, I think anyway, to find that Mike is drunk when we meet him. He's just as much as the others a part of that lost generation mentality. And to that end, right, uh, we we see the pervasive use of alcohol throughout all of book one and now into book two, into chapter eight, right? But there's also this sort of undercurrent, if you will, of sadness, whether it's Bill's incoherent, sort of drunken behavior when we first view him, or with Jake, Brett, Mike. There's all of that. And it really appears to be these characters really trying to sort of numb themselves with alcohol, right? Drown out the pain or sort of anesthetize themselves to the emotional and psychological pain that they're suffering. They're trying to get rid of that unreasonable wound or loss as a result of World War One, or what H.G. Wells called the war to end all wars. And there's sort of this seeming meaninglessness, if you will, that sort of pervades all of it, and it's sort of captured by their just constant consumption of alcohol. And then finally, we also have this idea of loneliness, right? And it's all over the place with the chapter. If you go back and look, when Jake is describing different scenes, he's always taking note of pairs of people, right? He's standing on the bridge with Bill, and he notices a man and a woman walking together arm in arm. Later on, he makes note of a woman ladling stew onto a plate that an older man is holding. And seemingly everywhere Jake looks, when he has a minute to describe the scene, there are men and women pairing off, and it carries on right to the end of the chapter. Of course, when Brett leaves with Mike, and of course, that one is probably the most painful of all, but it's just sort of this constant reminder about what's missing from Jake's life. Well, there you have it with chapter 8. Please let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and I will talk to you all soon.